While I've been fond of Falcom games for about a decade now, I have not been very happy with their output over the last few years. Regarding Trails, I think the series has been on a writing decline since about Cold Steel 4. Calvard was mostly a boring waste of time, only rarely dipping into areas of either being genuinely good or embarrassingly awful. I liked Yusunai's gameplay, but the story was formulaic and underwhelming, and I didn't even bother finishing 10. In my opinion, many of these problems can start to be traced back to a game they released in 2015, Tokyo Xanadu. Based on the Cold Steel engine, it was a revival of an older series of theirs, the Xanadu series, but with a more Persona-style modern-day setting that mixed in dungeon crawling with these optional affinity events. I did enjoy TX for what it was, but the drop in writing quality from Cold Steel to that was noticeably sharp, and sadly I don't think has really recovered much since. Not just the story of Falcom games, but I also think the gameplay itself became more formulaic, and any challenge or difficulty was slowly sanded down to where I could beat Trails Through Daybreak on Nightmare without breaking a sweat at all. And I am not a pro gamer. But, for all its faults, TX did have fun gameplay and an interesting setting, with many layers and factions to its world that were only barely explored in it. So, at the announcement of a sequel, I was excited, albeit a bit apprehensive. Then came the first gameplay trailer, which seemed to be throwing out basically everything of the original game's design, including the setting, and pretty much starting over from scratch with a 2D side-scroller instead of the full 3D dungeon exploration. You combine these two factors together, and I wasn't exactly chomping at the bit for this game. But I have a history with Falcom, they're kind of comfort food for me, and it is relatively a new IP of theirs, so with its official release, at least in Japan about a week ago, I thought I would at least give it a try, a few hours, and see what I thought. Turns out, we may be so back. After finishing the first of the game's 5 chapters at about 6.5 hours, to my utter shock, Kyoto Xanadu was far more enjoyable than any Falcom game I have played in years, both in the gameplay and the story. It's the freshest too, trying a lot of new things and being far closer to a Persona-like, but with some unique twists. Okay, the setup, KX takes place in a modern-day Japan. Technically it's alt history, but so far that part doesn't seem to matter much. You play as this guy Ray, who, long story short, gets supernatural abilities and is enrolled in a school where they explore and fight monsters in a parallel world called Xanadu that's constantly threatening to leak into our world. Yeah, to be clear, this is pretty generic anime fantasy school stuff on the whole, but there's a lot of heart and detail to these characters that make them more fun. Among my many issues with the recent Trails games, one of the big ones is how absolutely frictionless and polite everything and everyone is. People talk about writing that feels like HR was in the room, and yeah, that's basically the whole Calvard trilogy. With very rare exceptions, everyone is just nice and good to each other with no serious conflict or tension with anyone who isn't a cartoon villain. Even characters or factions that have previously been shown to be morally dubious, if not outright evil, have basically all the edges sanded off. It's a simplification, but Kyoto Xanadu feels like they remembered that friction and interpersonal conflict makes for a more compelling story. It's not that the characters are super deep or complex, but there's more bumping of heads and clashing of egos in a way that contributes to the growth, rather than just being a gimmick. Again, basic stuff, but it's largely been missing for the Falcom games in the recent years, especially for how long they are. There's a lot of attention given to small details in dialogue and world building and animations that add personality and nuance to each of these tropes and these characters, feeling like they were given a bit more thought. World building in particular has usually been a strength of Falcom's, and that is the case here. I, for one, was very upset that they basically threw out everything from Tokyo Xanadu to start over with a whole new setting, but that's not really the case. While they may not technically share continuity, they have ported over most of the world building that was actually done in Xanadu to this new setting. So organizations like Zodiac or Nemesis or the Church are still involved here, although not entirely sure to what extent yet. And while I like the world in Tokyo Xanadu, it's not like I was super attached to any of those characters, so if they showed up again, I wouldn't be like, oh, Reen's back, for the, 800th time. Admittedly, the primary flaw of the writing is still the pacing. Everything is incredibly overwritten, often taking double the lines that actually needs to convey what information it needs. I understand there's something to be said about pacing and building an atmosphere, but it's a balancing act, and you do need to make sure the information you're receiving is actually somewhat worthwhile. With a plot this frankly generic, you don't have the time to be repeating things that were just said twice several seconds ago. Again, if you're familiar and enjoy Falcom and their games, you're going to be accustomed to this, but for those not, just be aware you're going to be doing a lot of reading, and a decent chunk of it is going to be filler. The game's visuals look about on par with their recent stuff. Environments look kind of like a mid-range PS3 game, just with better lighting. But character models and animations have improved considerably and carry a lot of the scenes. They got a lot of personality and life to them, and these little ways they are able to use, even some of the pre-existing animations to create humorous or endearing situations. It reminds me very much of the original Persona 3 and 4 and how they do that with the limited animation set in those games. Regarding music, usually a strong suit for Falcom. I like the music. There are some standout tracks, a lot of tracks that are kind of nice ambience, and no sing-a-slop, at least so far as I've been able to notice. I do overall think the glory days of Falcom BGMs are behind us, unfortunately, but it is at least nice. Alright, the gameplay. So, Tokyo Xanadu was full 3D exploration, while Kyoto Xanadu has moved to a side-scroller mode, plays a lot closer to a simplified but a Metroidvania. That did worry me at first, but after playing it, I think it's a lot better. That's likely on account of the fact that they're not trying to jerry-rig the Cold Steel engine to working with this totally different style of game. Instead, it feels like everything was designed from the ground up to match the vision of what Kyoto Xanadu was supposed to be. While you're in 2D mode most of the time, you do have the boss fights, or occasionally you'll come across these challenge doors, which do go to a more full 3D mode that plays a lot closer to something like Ys. It is a nice change of pace, especially since the controls are all the exact same. And most of the ways you could break Tokyo Xanadu have been removed from this. The game, admittedly, in line with recent Falcom, is very much on the easy side. I initially started on hard and eventually bumped it up to the hardest difficulty, which I believe is usually recommended just for New Game Plus. But at that point, it was actually really fun. The hardest difficulty gave me the most fun out of the whole game, so far anyway. On point, even with a block spamming exploit I discovered, I still ended up dying about 12 times to the Chapter 1 end boss. And it was really satisfying. It was great. I had to put in a lot of effort, and it was quite nice when he finally went down. So yeah, I would recommend starting on hard and maybe bumping it up to the hardest difficulty if that's too easy for you. Tokyo Xanadu had party members to its combat system, and this does as well, but I've only gotten the first one. I believe there are fewer in this game. And honestly, it's more than fun enough with just one character, so I don't imagine much will change for the worse in that regard. Now, I did say the game feels more like Persona, because in this you run on a calendar system, where you manage your time throughout the day, you raise affinity with characters, you do part-time jobs, and you do different activities to increase your stats. You have 3 primary stats in this, which are, as far as I can see, mainly used to unlock new abilities in combat. Emphasizing that combat is the game's primary focus. You can raise these through doing different activities throughout your day, or through the studying system, which has you applying a random draw from a deck of cards onto different classes throughout your school day, determining kind of what you want to focus your studying on. And as you increase your affinity with the characters, you'll actually get new cards that have new effects, allowing you to further maximize this and get the most amount of points out of your attribute increased. So far, here at the start, I like the system a lot. It is very Persona-like, but it's substantially different in its certain flavor and its focus. All that said, while I am very positive right now, I am still early, only at Chapter 1. And while I'm glad the game seems to be a bit on the shorter side for a Falcom game, I have also had many a Falcom game where I started out very positive and was much less so by the end. So, at the very least in this case, there is no, or at least very little, established continuity for them to completely butcher, so that's a plus. Now, is it $50 good? I don't know if I'd go that far just yet, but it is early, so who knows. I know most people will probably be waiting for the official localization. I used an MTL patch, which you can find pretty easily, largely because I'm not a fan of the localization of Falcom games. So yeah, MTL was my preferred option, and surprisingly, I actually think it's really solid. I do believe they did a editing pass after the initial translation, but it is fully comprehensible, and from the little Japanese I know, everything sounded completely correct, so there's that. Well, that's my impressions of Kyoto Xanadu after the first chapter. It's a very strong start. A lot of Falcom games have that and fall off, so we'll see if it sticks the landing.